Peterson, Anchorage Assembly.
Bernie Hall.
Amanda Moser, Clerk's Office.
Jackie Yeagle, Clerk's Office.
You can identify yourself.
Eugene Haberman to represent myself.
Hello, Kerwin. David Osborne.
And the Board of Ethics is in a meeting, so
And we're cautiously optimistic that we will receive an update from them before the end of the meeting.
Okay.
They are discussing the AO 2015-63 and the impact it may have on assembly members and assembly members being able to vote on that, since it does change the election date. So hopefully we'll get an update from them by the end of the meeting, but in case we don't, we can come back to that issue, or maybe set a special meeting if we need to.
okay. Very good. So that technically will take us off of AO 63 until we do get.
Well, one thing that we had discussed at the last meeting was having a clerk's office update just on the impact of having the municipal elections at the same time as the state elections. So I've prepared just a few things to discuss if we want to go into item number 3.
The floor is yours, Ms. Moser.
Thank you very much. So, we have been discussing since, December of 2013, what it would look like if the municipality of Anchorage election was moved to November, which is the same time that the state of Alaska and federal elections are held. Those conversations began because assembly members were introducing ordinances to change the election date. And so the clerk's office began to attempt to understand what that impact would look like to have a concurrent election at the same time as the state's election. So first and foremost, I think the main impact that we would have about the municipality of Anchorage's elections being at the same time as the state's is, I think it's important for folks to understand that it's going to be a concurrent election. If our election's at the same time as the state elections, the state is not going to run the municipality of Anchorage election. The municipality of Anchorage elections are a lot more complicated than the state's elections, and we're really impacted by different items on the ballot, which causes us to have multiple ballot styles. We have multiple ballot styles that are all within one precinct, and this happens mostly because of the service areas. And these service areas include the park, fire, road, and police service areas. If there's a bond that addresses any of those service areas, they're required to be voted on by people who live within the service area, along with people who live outside the service area. And both the inside the service area and the outside of the service area has to pass. So every ballot that's voted on in the municipal election will have the language for the proposition for the service area. They're just counted in the different categories based on if that voter lives in the service area or outside the service area. One thing that the state of Alaska has with their elections is they just have one ballot style per precinct for their general elections. So they don't have to identify which ballot style the voter would get. So that's really important to understand, because we can't just put our items on the state's ballots. We would have to have a concurrent election, a separate election for the municipality of Anchorage. And with that concurrent election, it's going to require a municipal ballot and a state ballot, along with municipal election workers and state election workers. And I think that that is where we kind of come into one of our first major issues with the concurrent election. The municipality of Anchorage, the clerk's office, hires over 600 election workers for our municipal elections. It fluctuates, depending on how many precincts have split precincts each year, and we staff up a little bit more for elections we anticipate might be a higher turnout. Out of those 600 election workers, over 500 of them are both state and municipal election workers. So when we begin to go looking for our staff for our concurrent election, we have a very small pool to select from because most folks will be working with the state on their election. And I can tell you that over the past 5 years that I've been in the clerk's office working with elections, it's a challenge, and it's getting more challenging each year to staff for elections. It's a struggle to find qualified workers who want to work one day of year, come in for training on a very specific task that requires strong attention to detail. So it is really hard to staff those precincts. So that, I think, is one of the major concerns, is being able to find election workers for that concurrent election. The second challenge that we would encounter is polling locations. We have 122 precincts within the municipality of Anchorage. We use everything from schools to athletic clubs to churches. And as I mentioned, this would be a concurrent election. We would share the precinct with the state of Alaska's election workers, and we would set up our own voting location within it. A lot of these areas that we use are hallways, they're small rooms, they're tucked off to the side, and there's not a lot of space. So there'll be some major space issues that we'll have to explore with the 122 precincts across the municipality of Anchorage to identify if we're going to be able to fit 2 tables with 2 sets of election workers and all the other equipment that would be required. So there's a major concern on the physical locations as being able to hold 2 sets of election workers. The next concern is the equipment, and there's 2 components to the equipment concern. One thing that I think is important to understand is that with the concurrent election and with the municipality of Anchorage having a separate ballot style, the AccuVote system that we currently use is only able to have a memory card programmed with 1 election on it. So our election would be on a memory card separate from the state's. We would not be able to have both the state of Alaska ballots and the municipality of Anchorage ballots run through the AccuVote on the same memory card. So we would have to explore if the municipality of Anchorage wants to purchase new equipment in order to be able to scan our ballots, or if the municipality of Anchorage wants to have all of the people who vote in the municipal election put their ballot into a box that is stored the entire day until after the state's election's complete, and then the state finalizes their election reports, and then the municipality of Anchorage could then at that point insert our memory card and scan the ballots throughout the day. I think that brings up a variety of potential challenges. One, I would have concerns about unscanned ballots being in a precinct all day. We would have to make sure we had a very secure location. The other thing is, one thing when you vote, it's very nice to be able to scan your ballot through the AccuVote and see that it's tallied. If you're just putting it in a box and you want to know that it's counted, then you're going to have to come back later in the day to see it run through the AccuVote. And my other major concern is that, our election workers get to the precinct at about 6 or 6:30 in the morning. They're probably not going to be running the ballots through until about 9 or 9:30 at night. And that makes a very full day for
I'm fine, just had to make an appearance.
our election workers. So there's some concerns with that. So that's the one part of the concern. Should we purchase, or should we use the state's equipment? There is security issues about having the ballots held throughout the day, and then it creates a full day for our election workers if they're then waiting to scan them until the end of the night. And last, if we do choose to purchase our own equipment, there's a pretty substantial expense required with that to purchase over 130 AccuVote machines. And the biggest concern that I think we keep coming into here at City Hall is where would we then store all of that equipment? The one benefit of using the state's equipment is that we borrow it for election season. We use this room to store everything, but then we're able to return it back to the state at the end of it and get our valuable real estate back here at City Hall to be able to use for other functions. So that is another concern. The last few items that I'm going to talk about is just some of the logistics that we really encountered this past year when we had our item on the ballot with the state's elections. There was a lot of things that came up that we hadn't prepared for. And so one thing we recognized is that we have some different early voting sites. So that might be something we want to explore about changing our early voting sites so that it's less confusing to the voter. They would just have one place to go. We would have to work more closely with the state as far as sending out our voter pamphlets. We've got some feedback that folks were frustrated that the states went out a couple weeks before ours did. So we'd have to work on the state's timeline as to when they send those out to make sure that we are communicating at the same time. And then one thing that, as an elections administrator, I am concerned about is the impact of having, on the even years, potentially a larger turnout, and then the odd years, a smaller turnout. I think it could impact the planning and administration of the elections if it sort of flip-flopped between how we had turnout. It would make it harder to anticipate and identify trends in voting and stuff like that. So just a few other little things like that that I would be concerned about. So we have a work session planned tomorrow, and we'll talk about those things again, just to give everyone everyone on the assembly just an idea of the clerk's office concerns with the administration of an election in November at the same time as the state.
Okay. Pete, if you're okay with it, in consideration of Mr. Nesbitt's time, I'd like to switch topics real quick and give David a chance to give us an update from the Ethics Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it okay if I just sit right here, or would you prefer that I'm at the desk?
Wherever you're comfortable.
We're having an ethics meeting right now, and I just stopped down here to give you an update. We received a request. We're acting on the assumption that we received a request to consider the I don't know if it's proposed legislation to repeal the election date, and we've been going around and around about this for the last 45 minutes, and I'm here to give you a quick update on where we are with this. And I believe the request was for an informal opinion from us. And the way we saw it is this. I'm going to try to do the best I can to summarize this as quickly as possible and kind of give the Assembly an idea of where the board is sitting on this issue. It is our understanding that the legislation is meant to repeal the current election date change. And so, and that there was a consideration from members of the Assembly that our previous decision from the Board of Ethics would not apply to this because it would have to do with truncating a certain term rather than extending it, which is what was the basis of the issue in the previous decision. The concept that we had at the time was that there would be a conflict of interest for those Assembly members who would be lengthening their period of time or voting on that issue. Now, the Board of Ethics, based on our discussion, feels as though there remains a conflict of interest. And the reasoning for that, and why the Board of Ethics thinks that its prior decision would apply to this repeal action also would be to those Assembly members who vote for the truncation, of course, they're limiting their term, so that is not a conflict there. But for those who may vote against it, that would be still a conflict, because it would be, and as a result, it would be the fact that they're faced with the decision of which direction to go. That in and of itself would be a conflict, and the logic would apply from the previous decision to the action whether to repeal it. Based on that, though, and this is what we've been trying to come up with for the last half an hour, which is some kind of proposal or resolution on how to resolve what we, or what the board feels is a remaining conflict of interest. The one way to handle it would be to simply extend it to 2018, the effective date of the repeal. Then, of course, you're having probably, right? I just walked in the middle of Ms. Moser's explanation of how it sounds to me like this is a very challenging task for the city. So then, of course, you'd have an election in, November of 2017, and then another one in April of 2018. I don't know how, I'm still trying to keep up with the math, but I can only imagine what that would be like, the practical ramifications. There's another issue, too, of the numbers. How many members of the Assembly would be conflicted and how many would not, based on the fact that whether 5 or 6 that particular election cycle would either be up for re-election, would decline to run for another term, or those people who would not have a conflict because they were terming out. And then whether you could come up with the math to come up with a quorum who could then vote on it. And right, so suddenly we're going in circles, except for the fact that if a person who were to face a re-election cycle in 2016 were to propose the legislation, that would then give the intervening removal of the conflict, because that person would then face election 2016. If that person were to co-sponsor that legislation, then that may remove some of the conflict that concerned the board dealing with the extension of the time the first time. That's where we're at. If that helps clarify the board's position. And I think that we have some written materials, we were presented with them this morning, that Ms. Ennis had come up with. And so I don't know whether we would like to follow up with that with something more formal, or whether we can wait, because I understand that the legislation may be introduced differently or with something else going on. I don't know, but that's kind of where we're at for now. I don't know if that helps the committee.
David, I think the one other thing that you talked about was disclosures. So we talked about the sponsor, and then you talked about disclosures. I thought that was a good discussion.
So part of what is bogging the Assembly, or I'm sorry, the Board of Ethics down is a disclosure issue, and trying to deal with provisions of the code and how the disclosures affect that. If a person is disclosing his or her interest, then that then is something that the Assembly under the code then deals with. There has been an issue that's been raised partly by some of the more philosophical minded members of the Board of Ethics that have to do with this infinite disclosure issue. How do you disclose something when you're disclosing your own interest every time you vote on something to somebody else's disclosure? And you start getting into this web of disclosure issues. And that also has to do with the disclosure on who is proposing the legislation. You're disclosing it, and that came up with an earlier decision too. Is the disclosure itself, is the proposal an official action that requires disclosure? Pretty soon you start running into these lengthy discussions on how to extricate yourself from the weeds. Is that what you're referring to?
I think Mr. Falsey suggested that you disclose, and then the Assembly deals with it through the parliamentary procedure.
That's another issue. Okay. So the discussion that we had was, once it's brought to the Assembly's attention, then it's up to the Assembly to decide whether there's been a conflict. And that is something that is within the discretion of the Assembly. And so I'm trying to remember exactly what Mr. Falsey was recommending, but I think the concept is how to get it to the Assembly's hands how to get into the discussion of, with the assembly of the, what's that called again?
The sponsor?
The necessity.
Oh, rule of necessity.
The rule of necessity. And how that applies to assembly matters, and how they can determine on their own that this is a matter of necessity that needs to be voted on regardless of potential conflicts, and disclosures of those conflicts, and the number of disclosures. And how if everybody's conflicted out, how do you still make decisions? That's right. So it's a balancing of a lot of different interests and issues, and dealing with a code that is currently being examined for rewrite.
As far as time sensitivity on this particular ordinance, it has been introduced. It was referred, of course, to your committee as well as our committee. My response to you is we're going to give you whatever time you need, which means that this is supposedly coming back before us on the 14th. And we would just ask for it to be delayed until we get a resolution from the Ethics Committee. This is a big deal. And it's amazing how complicated something so simple can get, because it really isn't simple, as well as the realization that running elections in concert with each other simultaneously is very complicated as well. So.
And if I may add something also.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to point out that it looks like the sponsors of this ordinance are Member Flynn and Member Honeman. And Member Flynn's term limited, and Mr. Honeman, I believe, was on the ballot in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So they might actually qualify under the parameters.
That's right. Yes, sir. And that was the concept that we had, is we didn't know whether it was co-sponsored or just sponsored by Mr. Flynn, because we recognized, we pulled up the sheet for the election cycles, and if Mr. Honeman is up for re-election.
Mr. Flynn introduced and Mr. Honeman asked to be added.
Okay. That may help resolve this issue. If I may address the Assembly too, and this is something that we can take up at another time in more detail, but the Board of Ethics is very conscientious, let me rephrase that, very aware of timeliness issues. And it's a constant balancing act between getting something out quickly because we understand that there is a reliance on those decisions, and also making sure that we're working within the code as accurately and as deliberately as we possibly can. We are doing our very, very best, we promise, to be timely as possible, as timely as possible. And so, and part of this too, I think, is that the Board of Ethics is becoming increasingly involved in assembly matters. That is where we feel we are best utilized, rather than some of the administrative things that we used to spend more time with. This is a transition period, I think, and I think that we will endeavor, as current chair, I am very conscientious of trying to further that transition into something that's a little bit more streamlined and efficient for these types of projects, because it's very easy for our board to get bogged down in what appear to us as being more substantive issues rather than the procedural things that we used to just kind of knock out. And so that is something that I'm actively working on with the clerk's office and with the other members of the board as well.
It appears to me that the best thing for us to do at this point in time is we will probably go back to the body as a whole with the recommendation that we postpone this another 2 weeks till the second meeting in July to give you time to and then we would take this up again at our meeting in July. So actually, what we will probably end up doing is postponing this till the first meeting in August, because we won't meet again prior to our first August meeting.
And perhaps,
It's the Assembly on the 28th.
I would maybe, through the chair, would you like to schedule your meetings so that they're not at the same time? So that way the Board of Ethics could come to the Ethics and Election Committee meeting. I
If I
think
may-
that they are falling on the same.
Yeah, no, we're fine. If we're anything, we're flexible.
What I would suggest is this month's meeting was an unusual date.
Okay.
We typically meet on the second Wednesday, and so we don't typically conflict. And so we will, next month, I presume, go back to our regular meeting, and then I will be happy to report back to the committee. You
Very
typically
good.
meet this time of the month?
Fourth Wednesday, third Wednesday, fourth Wednesday,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
But my guess would without looking at the calendar, I don't know, I still don't know who we meet prior to the second meeting in July.
I can-
We'll look at the calendar and see.
I can tell you right now.
Yeah. But this is important work you're doing, so we want to give you the time and not pressure you to do that. So that will be what we'll do, and by the time we go to our next meeting, we'll have a date set if we want to have it postponed. Very good. Great. All right. Thank you, Mr. Vanessa.
Maybe excuse
Appreciate
Mr.
it.
Chair.
Yeah, don't turn your hair gray worrying about this, okay?
I'm getting enough.
Thanks, David.
All right, take care.
Okay.
So when is the fourth Wednesday?
The fourth Wednesday is the 22nd, because July 1st falls on the Wednesday, and there's
Okay,
5
so we may-
Wednesdays in July. So we'll have, and then the assembly meetings are the 14th and the 28th. So we should be in a good spot if we meet
Okay.
July 22nd.
We'll go with a postponement to the 28th.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, back to your report. You basically, it's amazing what happens when you don't interrupt a presenter and give them time to do it. You basically answered every question that I had except for one, but Mr. Peterson?
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and the challenges in a regular municipal election are, it's a pretty tough hill to climb, and then you add about another half a dozen more challenges on there, and, there's just too many opportunities for things to not go smoothly. And I don't see where we would get the election workers. I just don't, I don't know where you find another 500 people.
That's, through the chair, my biggest concern with one of the blessings that we have with our elections is our long-term election workers who, I will say over and over again, have supported the municipality and supported our democratic process. And I think that one of the best examples of that is in 2012 when we had the challenges with the election. If it wasn't for the ingenuity of our long-term election workers who were able to help come up with solutions to the ballot shortage, I think we could have been in a lot more hurt than we were. And to think about running an election and staffing with, over 500 brand new election workers, I think that would make me feel very anxious.
I've got two things I want to be clear on. One is the voter register. We would have to have 2 voter registers there. They would have to be in the register for the state as well as then come back and do the identification and sign the voter register the second time for the state.
Absolutely, and through the chair, just to give a little bit more information on that for the public. The voter register is, each precinct has a list of every registered voter that lives within that geographic area, and it has, their address, and they sign the voter register when they vote. Those voter registers are used to update voter history, and also used if we need to go through and review an election. And we've needed to do this in 2012, and in 2013, we've had to go back and look at some of our precincts to review who voted, and we were able to use that. We would, with the concurrent election with the state, we would want to have a separate voter register, because I think people are going to come in and not everyone's going to want to vote in both elections, even if they're conveniently on the same day and at the same place. Some people might still come in and only want to vote on the state election, or maybe they only want to vote on the municipal election. So we need to have the separate registers to track specifically who's being issued a ballot for which election and casting that ballot in which election.
And my other question, maybe a simple answer, I think, but with precincts, with voting concurrent with the state, are all of our precincts exactly the same, or are so we'd have no issue with people going into the precinct and having two precincts to be able to vote?
Through the chair, we use the same precincts that the state uses. We use the same buildings that they use for their election. So someone wouldn't have to come in to one precinct for the municipal election and then go to another one for the state election. That is correct.
Yes.
I just was having to think, if people are having to go in and register for the state election and then vote the state election, go to a different table, register for the muni election, and then vote the muni ballot, we could have long lines at some of these voting precincts, and voters could get frustrated and just throw up their hands and give up and not vote at all. So the idea that we move the election to November to increase voter turnout may actually backfire and go the other way.
Through the chair, I think that there's concerns with ballot drop. I think we see that already. The items on the back of the ballot aren't voted on as much as the items on the front of the ballot. I think I saw Barbara's hand go up, and I'm channeling her right now. I think one of the other concerns is if someone's voting outside of a precinct and they're voting a question ballot, they're going to have to vote 2 question ballots, which people get frustrated already at the additional paperwork required with the question ballot. And so I think it does have the potential for voter fatigue, voter confusion, voter frustration. I understand in theory the idea of everyone voting on the same day, and if we could all be on the same ballot, I 100% think it's a great idea. And since I was appointed to this position in August 2012, have worked to increase voter turnout. That is what I want. I want people to be engaged in our municipal election process. And so I want to support anything that I think is going to increase voter engagement in our municipal process. But I'm also concerned about the potential negative impacts that the same day election could have.
Mr. Chair, although that wasn't the issue that I was thinking of a slightly different issue. You asked about, are the precincts exactly the same? They are, and I think that the state they have one split precinct.
The state does not have any split.
No split precincts. So, but that's the problem. So everybody that goes in to vote their state ballot, they go into the precinct, everybody gets the same ballot. So the problem is when they come to the muni table, so the same issue of voter fatigue, and they could get any one of 6 ballots. And so that is because our election is, because of the taxing districts, our elections are just more complicated.
And we did discuss that a little bit at the beginning, but I think it really plays into the conversation about voter fatigue and voter confusion. Because, I will say, I spend about 10 days training our 700 election workers at about, 30, 40 hours of my life. And we spend about a half hour in each class talking about the split precincts because it's so complicated. It's so confusing. And I think having that right next to the state's election.
Mr. Steele, would you please join us at the head table? I saw you sneak in, and I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. We've been joined by Mr. Steele.
If I must.
You can come be a part of the conversation. The main reason that I asked that question was, for some reason in the back of my mind, I recall issues with split precincts where it gets very complicated. We've got some that are little bitty pieces. I'm also trying to visualize, I guess, in my mind, you're showing up to vote. You've got to go register to get your municipal ballots. And then you go register, or vice versa, however. But I'm assuming the protocol would be, you get your municipal ballot, you go vote those, and then you bring them back and they go into wherever the county is going. Then you go back and get in another line and do your registration for the state and then go vote those. You wouldn't give these people all of these ballots so they go into the booth one time and vote, because then you're going to have the confusion that will come out about which AccuVote machine they put in and what box you put them in for storage.
Absolutely. Through the chair, one thing that we have been talking about since this first came up back in December of 2013 is, we would have to have colored ballots for the municipalities to be able to identify the separate ballots, but the potential for the municipal equipment, the municipal ballots to get shuffled with the states, I think that would be concerns about that, but you would have to go through two separate processes to get to the two separate ballots. We would have two separate groups of workers.
Any other discussion on this? Or let's go discuss our solution for a little while. Are you okay, Mr. Steele?
I'm fine with it. It's a complicated issue, and I would find a way not to have to do it. But that's
Well,
another story.
and that's
And
what
I
we're
heard
going
the
to
discussion about it.
What we're going to discuss next is alternative voting. Ms. Mosier?
So I'm going to direct everyone's attention to the colored sheet. There's some extra ones on the table right there. We have been exploring alternative voting options. We've been discussing this here at the Ethics and Election Commission or Committee for maybe about the last year or so. And we are moving a little bit more swiftly as we're beginning to identify some alternative voting methods and some possible solutions. And one thing as we've been going through this conversation about alternative voting methods is to really make sure that we have a solid mission, vision, and values that we're operating off of. And I think that I spoke about this a little bit on the previous topic. My goal since I've been in this position has been to engage the public in the municipal election process. I want it to be convenient and easy, and I want people to be engaged and to recognize the impact that municipal elections have on our day-to-day life. So the clerk's office has worked, and we've worked with Ernie Hall as the chair of this committee to identify both our mission and vision along with our values. And so one thing we've talked about is instead of referring to us as municipal elections, maybe having a more engaging title. And so we're rebranding as Anchorage Votes, sort of this proactive idea of being engaged in the election process. And our mission is Anchorage Votes serves the public, candidates, and elected officials by administering fair, transparent, accessible municipal elections consistent with all federal, state, and local laws. And our vision for Anchorage Votes is Anchorage Votes conducts elections with the highest degree of excellence and integrity, employs innovative technologies and proven strategies that maximize voter participation in the democratic process of local government and optimizes community resources. And one thing that is really important for us with our elections with Anchorage Votes is that our elections are accessible, convenient, inclusive, sustainable, responsible, and accountable. So as we move forward and talk more about our ideas for alternative voting options, this is what we are going off of. We want to have the open, fair, transparent election process, but we want it to be accessible to the public, convenient, inclusive, and sustainable. One thing that you've heard me talk about, especially on the last conversation, is the staffing of our 600 election workers. We have a group of election workers that are beginning to retire, but we don't have new workers that are coming in to take their place. And so I'm concerned what elections will look like in 5 years, because we don't have this backfill to come in and continue the precinct-based model. So exploring alternative voting methods really allows us to find a more sustainable way to look at elections. So we've talked at the last meeting, and we have been working really diligently in the clerk's office. We have worked to identify a group of stakeholders to vet our process. We have begun to contact them, and we hope to have them all contacted by the end of this week, towards the middle of next week. Once we've contacted everyone, we'll send out a letter, and we have set a tentative date for our first stakeholders meeting, which is tentatively July 15th. It's a Wednesday, and we hope to have it from 2 to 4. When planning meetings in the summer in Alaska, it's really helpful if they're not on a Friday or a Monday, because folks like to take long weekends. Figure there's a little bit more attendance when it's in the middle of the week, and folks are less likely to be coming or going from the river, especially when you're planning one in the middle of salmon season. So at that first meeting, we hope to get all the stakeholders engaged in our process, along with hopefully breaking off into some smaller committees. We've identified the need to have a technology committee along with a educational component committee, and so we'll work to identify those committees and those members and get folks set up with that. So we have more information that will be coming, and we hope to, of course, continue to bring forward that additional information.
I find that I have to make a disclosure here. I am one of those people that's impacted by the 17 election. I'm up for re-election in 2017.
Well, I'm not going to make the determination at this point if we have a conflict.
I understand.
I'm going to wait on
I'm not
the
going to vote on
decision
anything
from the
anyway,
ethics
so.
committee, okay? One thing that popped into my mind during our discussion here is with the state and using ActiVote machines, whether we buy our own, we don't buy our own, but if we're using them, they get set aside. I guess I'm coming back to the same thing in regards to the signature validation. At the time of an election, we were actually in the process of doing that. Are we way ahead if we go ahead and look at making arrangements to get our own ability to do signature validations as being dependent on a third party?
So through the chair, the clerk's office had a meeting set up with the state of Alaska, and unfortunately it got canceled, but we are in the process of still trying to reschedule that meeting. It's my understanding that they have been looking at a new voter registration database. We currently use FREMS database. It's a DOS-based system. And it's my understanding that the new system will have the voter's signature in it. And it's also my understanding that we will have access to that. So the clerk's office is working to reestablish that meeting moving forward to make sure that we do have access to that. And we have also been looking at signature verifying equipment as we've begun looking at the cost of this. And I think in the next week or two, we should be at a place where we're able to have a more firm discussion on cost, including the cost of the software for the by-mail elections, the cost for the signature verifying equipment. One thing that we've been discussing is the state of Washington and the state of Colorado utilize drop boxes, and that's something that we would like to explore, setting up drop boxes. And did I mention the signature verifying equipment? So we are in the process of getting some numbers. I've been working really closely with one of the companies for the equipment as for the by-mail election, and I have a quote, but I just need to do a little bit more due diligence on it before I'm able to present it to the committee, but we are really close to having some of those numbers.
So that would be possible for next.
Yes, absolutely. I was working diligently on the hopes that it could be for this meeting, but I am still sorting through the numbers because we have a quote for, one thing we discussed is doing a quote for just next election. So if we just did like a pilot project, what that would cost, and then in the future what it'll cost too. So we'll have to weigh both of those numbers.
Questions? Audience participation? Yes, Mr.
My name is Eugene Carl Haven. I follow public process, and the public process is an appropriate decision made by the governing body more likely in public interest. I was thinking not saying anything here at this meeting, but I only have one thing to just note. I had other things, but just this one thing. I noticed during the meeting that there was like rescheduling of certain dates, dealing with certain issues that were addressed here, so not today. And I note that there's a meeting calling for tomorrow from 12 to 12:30, Assembly Work Session AO 2015-63, repealing 2014-28. Because of what's said here today, is that still going to happen, or is that being rescheduled for the tomorrow's meeting? Is that going to happen tomorrow meeting?
I'm not aware of that.
Through the chair, Assembly Member Patrick Flynn had requested a work session, just a half-hour work session to review the same items that we discussed today, the ordinance to repeal the ordinance that scheduled the election for November. So that is on the agenda for tomorrow, and it is a work session of the Assembly as a whole, whereas this was just a committee meeting. So yes, that is still scheduled for tomorrow.
But with what was said here today, is this going to change that? There could be a cancellation, or is that still going to happen? That's what I was trying to get
It's
at.
a very good question. Mr. Flynn, at this point, I'm sure is not aware of the dilemma that the Ethics Commission is on. So we share that. It may be possible that he does cancel it, but I can't say that for sure.
And I appreciate the answer you gave me, and that's why I'm bringing it up, because this was posted like just a short time ago, like within a day. And now things change, and I understand that, and I'm not complaining here. But if there's any way that this can get clarified so that it could get posted somewhere on the website, that for this meeting, not just a half hour before the meeting, hopefully today, that it gets noted, is it going to happen or not happen? And thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was thinking maybe if the Ethics Committee, after they finish their meeting today, if someone from that committee would come to the work session tomorrow and give us a report, and give us an update, that might be good as well.
Mrs. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I think they're unwilling to do that, Mr. Peterson. The problem is they had a draft prepared opinion that the board council prepared, but the board wasn't prepared to adopt it. I mean, they spent 45 minutes just discussing this issue and came to the conclusion that they needed more time. So I don't think that they would be willing to do more than than just ask for more time. So I think that perhaps Mr. Hall, and since I attended the ethics meeting, could consult with Assembly Counsel Julia Tucker, and we could include Ms. Moser in that discussion, because the presentation tomorrow is from Ms. Moser. It's not something, and that would be the question to Ms. Tucker, is does Ms. Moser have a conflict to present the information that she presented you today regarding that ordinance? And I think we could ask that question of Ms. Tucker shortly after this meeting and make a decision, rather than asking the Board of Ethics, because I'm not sure that they'd be willing to express that opinion at this time.
Anyone else?
Through the chair, Ms. Moser, has the city and the state ever before had concurrent elections?
There has been, to my knowledge, through the chair, a few times that the city has had items on the state's elections. It's important to note that those items have all been area-wide issues and not the elections that we have where items come down to specific service areas.
Dave?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm David Dunsmore, staff to Assemblyman Peterson, and I wasn't going to speak, but I hope my boss doesn't mind that I am. But just after hearing Ms. Moser's great presentation on some of the challenges, there are a couple of others that I thought would be helpful to put on the record, but I thought from my perspective, being involved in the more private sector aspect of elections. In one election integrity issue that would result from having a concurrent election where the municipality didn't have its own AccuVote machines is the AccuVote machines provide a really convenient, because they keep a running tally of how many ballots have been ran through them. It's a really convenient way for the poll workers, the poll watchers, and media, and anyone interested who's in the precinct to be able to just make, random spot checks to make sure that everything's going well. And, if you observe a precinct, most experienced poll workers will, several times the other day, check the running tally, make sure that adds up with the number of ballots that have actually been distributed. Without the city having its own AccuVote machines, that would be a level of election integrity that wouldn't be available. And this is something I've noticed, and when I've served at the poll watcher places, sometimes never been an issue that's very major, but if they notice that something's the count's not adding up, they can stop and look and make sure that there wasn't a real issue that needed to be fixed. And if there is, work on it right away, rather than finding out after the polls are closed. Another problem that I would think would be kind of, no matter what system you would devise, would be hard to prevent, would be the issue of people who are voting question ballots in both state and municipal election. And also not just question ballots, but also special needs ballots that are returned to the precinct. Putting them either in the wrong envelope or putting both ballots in the same envelope. And then when you would separate out into the two separate counting processes, and you might have an envelope that's being adjudicated by the state that really has a municipal ballot in it, and vice versa. And how the process works, especially with the system where, the main underpinning of the question review process, once you open the envelope and dump the ballot out, that there's no way to ever trace that particular ballot back to which envelope it came from. I don't think there would be a possible way that if you dump out the envelope that was a perfectly valid vote, find it has the wrong ballot, there wouldn't be a way for you to make that end up counting. There'd also be the issue that there are some people who are only eligible to vote in the state election. For example, you're commuting from Valley, you decide to vote a question ballot here, or you're not registered to vote, but you're entitled to vote in the federal election with same-day registration. But you'd probably, with the concurrent election, you might have kind of inadvertently be entrapping people into voting for elections that they're not eligible for, which may have some potential consequences. The other thing I would see from my perspective as a professional political consultant is I think having a concurrent state municipal, especially with a presidential year or a high-profile statewide election like we had at the previous state election, would be the effect it would have on the school board and service area election. You know, usually the service area boards are not contested, but when they are, those races tend to be fairly close. But I would expect that you would just run into a situation where it wouldn't be possible for school board candidates to raise enough funds to be able to have enough voters even know who they are. I mean, that situation with the school board would just be, or at least the people elected in the even years would mostly be just whoever won the lottery, which letter got picked out of the hat and go on top of the ballot. And yeah, I just thought that those were worth putting on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dunsmore, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that when it comes to a decision time, I don't have much doubt that the recommendation from this body would be there's no way we do a concurrent election without our own AccuVote machines. I think if you tried to do an election without our own machines, it would be the biggest mess that you've ever imagined. I wouldn't even want to think about going through that scenario. So you're very, very correct. Anyone else? None? Thank you.